Other processes that you might like to get familiar with, or perhaps that you've heard of, are things like steaming or soaking. Of course, most of you have probably done some woodblock printing probably in high school, and that would have been some hand carving involved in that. You may come across the term aggregate lamination, and that really just refers to lots of different materials being glued together in sort of this sheet. This is a vertical laminate, and you can see all the different types of materials used to produce the final curved plank. An understanding of basic joints will give you the opportunity to create really interesting details in your furniture work. So jointing or joinery is essentially the process of getting pieces of wood to stick together. So the most obvious way of joining wood is to use nails or screws, but a lot of the time nails and screws can leave unsightly marks, and you might not want that if you're trying to produce something that is a quality furniture piece. So what you would need is an understanding of the different types of joints that are possible, and the most popular ones are the ones listed here. So dowel joints, butt joints, dovetail joint, lap joint, finger joint, mortise and tenon joints. The first image is a biscuit joint, and as you can see, we've got a slot in both sides of the timber plank, and then there's a dowel cord, a biscuit that goes in between. You usually use a little bit of craft glue or PVA glue to secure the biscuit in place as well. On the right hand side there are different biscuits as well as a couple of screws, and then you've also got the rounded dowels. So dowels are a fantastic way of joining two pieces of timber together, and in some respects it really adds structural integrity to your furniture items. Adhesives. There's lots of different ways of joining materials to wood. The most popular is probably using craft glue, especially if you're doing some lamination processes. However, it's a very slow drying time, so there's probably around 20 minutes or more that you need to wait for the glue to set. But it's quite a good adhesive to use. It's also non-toxic, so if it gets on your skin, you can easily peel it off once it's dried, or you can wash it off. The other types of glues I've listed here are a little more toxic, so you will need to probably use some latex gloves when you're applying these. So one of my favorites is Araldite. I like it because it dries very quickly and is a very strong epoxy, two-part epoxy glue. So as you can see, there's two syringes joined together, and you mix equal parts onto some sort of plastic container that you can chuck away later. So Araldite is good for hardwood. It's very quick drying and strong. Other glue types, Gorilla Glue, liquid nails, super glue, they're all fine. Check the information on your packaging to make sure that it's not going to damage your material. So you can download fact sheets from the internet, or you can do a little test strip. Be careful with using these glues on foam, because foam does not like some of these glues. It will essentially deteriorate or catch a light, so it can be quite dangerous to apply, for instance, some super glues to foam. So just be careful, do a little test strip. I always like to have double-sided tape in my toolbox. It helps with holding my models temporarily. It's not highly sticky, so it just holds for a short amount of time, and it's also really good for holding templates down onto your either paper templates or a very thin sheet of ply to use on your major piece of timber. So double-sided tape or painter's tape is really good as well. When using some of these adhesives, make sure that you wear a mask, protect your skin with latex gloves, use the glues in a well-ventilated area or use an extractor. And when you're mixing, make sure that you don't mix on the workshop tables, but rather on either a piece of cardboard or some other sort of material where you can chuck that piece of material out once you've finished mixing. Make sure that you clamp your work in place to provide a strong adhesion, or use some of the painter's tape to hold bits of wood together. You can also use clamps and masking tape. Finishing your work. So sanding and polishing is part of the model making process, and working with timber, there's lots of different ways to finish the timber to a beautiful result. So it's important to understand that you've got different grades of sandpaper. You've got something that's a very rough, coarse texture. That's the first one that you start with, and that might be your 80 grit sandpaper. Or you might be working through to 120 grit, which is like a medium range sandpaper profile, right down to something that's quite fine, like 220, even 400 grit sandpaper. Just remember to use the files and sandpaper that are appropriate for the stage of machining or polishing that you're up to. So always begin with something really coarse to get rid of the main timber burrs and splinters, and then progress down to something that's a lot finer. There's also some examples of other machinery you can use to sand your work. Spindle sanders or bobbin sanders are brilliant to use, especially if you're doing conical shapes, curved shapes. Palm sanders are awesome. Drum sanders are similar to spindle sanders, except rather than having the spindle upright, they have it lying down horizontally. Disc sanders are fantastic because they're very quick, but you've got to be careful what side of the disc you use, otherwise your work can go flying. Belt sanders are handy. Detail sanders, you can now buy very minuscule type sanding bits to attach to drills and so forth, and then orbital sanders as well. Think about the finish that you want, whether you want to paint, whether you want to have a natural oil finish or a waxy finish. Think about whether it's going to be a wood item that will take some food, or whether it's something that will be stepped on, for instance. So all of these impact the type of finish that you select. So think about the color, the scent, and the durability of the finish.